So hello, thank you very much to Mark for the very kind introductory remarks. As he said, my name's Natasha Foote. I am an agri-food reporter here in Brussels with the media Euractiv. I have the pleasure of moderating this session where we'll take a deeper dive into the role that innovation and research plays in achieving a more sustainable agri-food system. So we're talking here about all kinds of investments that are needed to support the Green Deal and climate-smart agriculture ambitions, new tools such as climate farming credits. We've already spoken about this. We'll delve in a little bit deeper, and other technological tools that can help us transition towards more regenerative and sustainable practices. So we'll be answering all of these questions with the help of our expert panel today, who I'll introduce to you shortly. And of course, as has already been said, this lands very well because today is World Soil Day, so what better day to be discussing what Lucas called our greatest asset, but it's also arguably one of the most underappreciated natural resources. So just a few points before we get stuck in. This will be recorded. Each session will be available later on if you want to relive all the fun again. We'll firstly hear from all of our speakers in turn from some introductory remarks before a short Q&A session. So keep that in mind as we're going along. Save your questions for the end. So I'd like to invite our panelists today up onto the stage. So with us today we have Julia Reido, who is a Junior Policy Officer for Agriculture and Sustainable Food at the European Office of the WWF. So welcome, Julia. We also have with us Chris Harbert, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Indigo Agriculture. We'll hear more about them later on, I'm sure. We also have Shari Rog-Fidler, who is the CEO of Farm Foundation and also a farmer herself, to bring a little bit of the farming perspective that we were saying was sometimes missing, as Lucas said. So welcome. We also have Jeremy Rollinson, who's the Senior Director of EU Government Affairs at Microsoft. And we'll hear more about what Microsoft's doing on the stage, talking about agriculture later on. And lastly, but not least, we have Kirsten Rosenau, who is Head of Unit for Research and Innovation at the European Commission's DG Agri. So welcome, all of you. As I said, well, I'll turn to each of you in turn for some introductory remarks. Actually, Kirsten, I think I'm going to start at your end. I'm going to start with you. So let's talk a little bit about the public investment in agricultural research. Now, the EU is aiming to increase spending in this area. Perhaps you could outline a little bit what the Commission is doing in this area and why you've decided to go that way, and perhaps any reflections you have on the keynote speeches that we have heard kicking off the session today.
Okay, thanks a lot, Natasha. It's a pleasure to be here. Also on World Soil Day, as all of you were saying, because we operate, in fact, the European Soil Health Mission. So this is a great thing. So we had a month ago the FAO Research and Innovation Days, and there it was actually deplored that research and innovation, the public investment for agriculture is going down worldwide. And I think it's good to be sitting here that actually at the US and the EU we've gone the contrary way. So we have increased our investment. So also the Undersecretary has already stated it. We're working together in Aim for Climate, for instance, where the EU is also a governmental partner. So these are all areas where we've seen, okay, there's really a need. We have to work, we have to bridge the gap between practice and science, technology and application on the field. And if we really want to make headways, advances on all three areas of sustainability, meaning social, economic, and environmental, we cannot at this very moment let the investments go down. But on the contrary, we have to heavily invest now because research and innovation, as all of you who work in that know, bear fruit only in a certain amount of time. So when we were going to the parliament to advance what we are actually doing for replacement of synthetic fertilizers, it's stuff that we started researching 10, 15 years ago. So it's not now, because we're in a crisis, that we start hectically acting, but we have to rely on what we have already underway. And I think in terms of issues that are important in this respect, and which have also been mentioned in the keynote speeches, is A, that we invest heavily in soil and making soils healthy again, soil recovery, that's key. And we have to also do it differently. It's not just doing something, but we have to do it differently. And I think the key word here was partnership. This is also what we do. that we try to have fix really a mission. What is the mission? Bringing a man on the moon, making soils healthy again. And what do we need by that time? How do we even measure soil health? So getting all of this together and making sure that we have the legislation, the science, which is a key enabler, and that we invest in local bottom-up innovation, because this is key if we really want to bridge. I mean, it's no good to have all the wonderful projects and then we have the results in our area, for instance, in the great institutes in Wageningen, in INRA, in Hohenheim, wherever, but it stays in the university or it stays in the lab. No, I mean, how do we actually go about in bringing this out on the field? And it's not the farmer's fault. The farmer is the greatest steward of the land. But it's very difficult in the conditions you have and you currently work in to make sure that you actually get the research and the science implemented on the field. And that's an area where in the EU we invest heavily, and we had a joint workshop with the US on that, and we have similar approaches, but where we can also exchange because we have some particularities, where we kind of bring in a given field really the searchers, the innovators, the businesses, the practitioners together. And we really have a bottom-up approach applied to the given local conditions. And then also get up again for the public research programming that we do. Where are the gaps? So the business models, the things that we're still missing in terms of, I don't know, soil decontamination, in nitrates or whatever, so that we have a circular approach to that and we make sure that there is some real actions on the ground, because otherwise the transition to sustainability is impossible, especially looking at the 3 dimensions. That's a bit as a tour d'horizon and a first reaction to what I've heard.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that overview. I'd now like you to, if you could pass the microphone to Jeremy. Yeah. So Jeremy, when we hear the word Microsoft, I think it's safe to say we don't automatically think about agriculture. But you've started to get involved more and more on digital agriculture and on that front. Perhaps you could explain the motivation behind this. What has interested you in this area? What are you currently working on in digital agriculture?
So why I'm here, basically.
Basically,
right?
yes. Why are you here?
Well, I think, listen, we're not experts on agriculture. I think we are trying to become more of experts in helping our customers that are experts at agriculture do more with the data and tools and requirements that they have in front of them. So when we think about the pandemic, our CEO likes to say that there was about 2 years of digital transformation in 2 months. I think even at the policy level, it wasn't that the ambitions that were there in a digital and green transition were wrong. If anything, it's just all the more reason to accelerate a lot of those targets. And I think I heard it earlier from the Commission speech. We certainly heard it from the US. I mean, partnership is key here. It's not something that any industry can do on its own. So we're seeing digital transformation across a number of customer segments, and agriculture is certainly one of the more exciting ones. And we look at that quite broadly, so there's even a manufacturing element that overlaps then, of course, with some of the taxonomies we use in a policy space here. But sticking to some of the challenges that I think we're looking at today, when we think about the biodiversity strategy, the farm to fork strategy, we think those are inspiring ambitions. So, we do think that the Commission is once again kind of leading in that space, and even last week's announcements is another example of where I think the EU has actually led on the policy front, and we welcome that. For those who've worked in Brussels, I think, we often agree on the what, it's the how that sometimes, everybody disagrees on. But our customers are better placed to speak to much of that. We know that we're going to need our help. We're going to need to help our customers in tracking and reporting, whether it's emission reductions. We know that some of the investments we've made in carbon removals and elsewhere, there's lessons that we want to continue to share. You heard the Commission mention earlier the importance of other voices. And as a corporate player with a large footprint, we've had to do some of this ourselves as well. With our agricultural customers in particular, when you talk about digital farming or precision farming, you talk about the soil proposal upcoming, those measurements and tracking that and identifying the insights that would drive actions after that, you're going to need the right tools. And we're building those together with our customers and putting those in their hands, and they're coming up with more and more exciting ways of tracking that and sharing that out amongst a broader agriculture community. So we look at our role there as very much at the partnership level, developing these type of cloud solutions and software solutions that don't stay in one jurisdiction or another. Sometimes there may be different reporting requirements and there's different standards that we talk about. But all the while, this is a global challenge. It's customers across the world, and especially whether it's local farmers or whether it's some of those larger players, they're all faced with new sets of requirements, new ambitions that we have. And we're there to kind of be a part of that journey and hopefully make it easier. So we're not experts in agriculture. I think we may be hiring a few here or there to help those customers on that journey, but they're the experts, and I think we're trying to just share some of our expertise in a data and digital technology sense to get there, because I don't think you can do it one on the own. I think the green transition will only be successful if there's a successful digital transition alongside of that, so that's why I'm here.
Excellent, thank you. And you mentioned that last week's proposals on carbon certification. We'll definitely come back to that in the discussion a little bit more. Shari, let me turn to you now. You should have the microphone, and maybe you can get the one in front of you. Might be easier. Lucas was talking about the lack sometimes of farmers' perspective, so let me bring you in to bring the farmers' perspectives here. You work with the Farm Foundation. Perhaps you could give us a little bit of an overview about what it is that you do, what you work towards, your interest in this topic, and maybe some of your reactions to what you've heard so far today.
Great, thank you, Natasha. I am really excited to be here on World Soil Day. As mentioned, I am a fifth-generation farm owner and operator in the USDA language. That means I not only own the farm, but I'm active on a daily basis with the decisions there. And I have to say, as a kid growing up in Nebraska on the farm, I was actually sad when I realized that kids in New York City didn't know what soil felt like, even tasted like, had no experiences with soil. And if you get to New York City, I will tell you that there's actually a museum of soil in Manhattan. You just need the key code. It's just a room full of soil. It's been there for 40 years. It's kind of odd, but kind of cool too. So talk to me about that afterwards if you're interested. But I'll be making my remarks with both of these hats, the farm owner-operator hat and the CEO of Farm Foundation, because I'm truly passionate about what we're doing here, so that's why I'm here. And by the way, Microsoft sits on our board, so one more reason for you to be here today as well. So on the farm owner side, we farm about 4,000 acres, and to Lucas's point, hearing from people who are doing this, we've been investing for over 150 years in our soils as an asset, but we have more tools now than we've ever had before in terms of measuring it, even though it's imperfect in terms of those tools. We do no-till, and we've invested in cover crops. And maybe later when we get to some of the challenges, I'd say we've kind of plateaued in what we've been able to do, and we can get into that in terms of the obstacles. In terms of being CEO of Farm Foundation, I'm guessing most of you are not familiar with Farm Foundation. We're probably one of the best kept secrets. We're about a 90-year-old think tank born just after the Dust Bowl in the US, and the first Ag Policy Institute in the US. We were known primarily as a think tank, but now we've repositioned ourselves much more as a do tank, and I'll clarify that in a little bit, really trying to accelerate practical solutions for agriculture. The 4 strategic priority areas that we have are first and foremost back to the soils in terms of sustainability, regenerative ag, and so forth. We helped stand up the Soil Health Institute in the US. And in our old think tank model, we maybe would have said that's enough. But on the do tank model, we're saying what more can we do to drive these practices? And it relates to one of our second areas, which is digital agriculture, working on data interoperability. There's so many gaps that need to be filled there. So for example, on soil health, in our do tank model, we've been standing up a series of events to identify some of the gaps in the data stack for soil health. We did an event storming and a hackathon to try to help advance that in terms of practical solutions. The third area is farmer health that we invest in. We mean that broadly, farmer mental health, physical health, financial health, and we've got a suite of services that we deliver on a solutions basis in some core states in the US. And then the fourth area is on trade. That's obviously important to me personally as a farmer as well as to Farm Foundation, and I'm thrilled that we have just in the last couple months launched a new collaboration to the theme of the day. Actually with the forum here, we've launched the Global Forum on Farm Policy and Innovation just a couple months ago with other sister organizations around the world that are nonpartisan, non-lobbying as we are, and evidence-based. So we're really looking forward into leaning into exploring more collaboration opportunities, especially in the EU and US. Farm Foundation actually has a project over this next year, so we'll be spending a lot more time in the EU advancing that project as well. I could go into some of the obstacles, but I think that might be a good place to stop for now. We can dig in later.
A bit later on. Yeah, thank you. And definitely, if I ever go to New York, I will definitely check out that museum. Thank you for that. So, Julia, let me turn to you now. So, how do you see digital solutions and innovations fitting into the transition towards more regenerative and sustainable solutions, and maybe, in the spirit of World Soil Day, helping to shift agri-food systems to one that prioritizes soil health?
So thanks for inviting us, WWF, and I think it's important to have our perspective in this discussion. WWF has not been involved in the past a lot in digital transition and technology applied to agriculture. And I think the main reason for that is that innovation and technology applied to agriculture has always been mainly focused on the economic side of sustainability. So if we are really thinking about a transition that entail the three dimensions of sustainability, so social and environmental, I think that this is the time really to increase investments in also technology that can be, and innovation that can increase the environmental aspects of sustainability. So it's quite clear that we have been producing beyond planetary boundaries for many, many years now, and the limits are there, and we are now in a position where we are beyond a safe space of operation. So we need to replace ourselves within planetary boundaries and respect those limits that the planet is giving us. The other fact is that I think that, for example, precision agriculture has been a lot focused on productivity and how to increase productivity, that it might entail a sustainability, environmental sustainability aspects like better use of natural resources and a better exploitation of natural resources. But I think that it's really, it cannot really contribute to a real shift in environmental sustainability that we are needing now. If we are not talking about how we are going to use our land and also shifting our attention not only on production but also on the consumption side. So what we are consuming and how it is reflected on land use and how the land is used and how it is reflected on what we consume. So I think innovation and research should really focus more on these aspects. And this brings me to my last point that it has already been mentioned by Mr. Vizek before, that we are really conscious that the transition towards sustainability is something that is very demanding, and it cannot the burden cannot be bared only from the production side, so only from farmers. So I would like to take the occasion here to remind the role that also the food industry in the middle chain of the food supply chain can play a really big role, because those are the actors that have a say in what has been sourced and what has been offered to the consumer. So I think it's very important to call them to play a role also in terms of supporting the transition from the production side. And I think there are already some interesting business models that actually and financially are rewarding farmers for their efforts. So I think this is the kind of innovation that we'd like to see.
Okay, thank you very much. And Chris, last but not least, let me turn to you. Perhaps you give us a little flavour of what it is that you do at Indigo Agriculture, and maybe share some insights from your experiences about, how you see best to accelerate the transition towards sustainable agriculture with digital innovations.
Sure, happy to. Indigo is an interesting company that has had a number of twists and turns. It was founded in 2014 And more recently, I joined the company in 2019, and at that point, we were just beginning the carbon program, and the carbon program was really a responsibility of mine to develop and grow there. We started working with farmers almost immediately, and my background, I'm a professor at University of Illinois. I'm on a board of a large ag retailer and chief strategy officer with Indigo. So I've been kind of up in the clouds thinking big picture about how to make all of this work. What's really important about what we were able to achieve, starting with working with growers in 2019 and 2020, working with them to make a practice change, actually do something different on their ground. And that's the key behind, I think, most of what we're doing here is a behavior change. We're asking people to do something different and then get rewarded for it and advance that financing forward to reduce the risk to where more and more growers will engage with that. We had our first year of the program, and it takes a while to work through registry approvals and independent audits, external parties all commenting in and making sure we're building these credits to a high standard. We had to begin all the way with growers on one end and buyers of credits on the other and educate both groups on what we were trying to do. And then do high quality science in the middle to assure everyone that this invisible gas that we're pulling out of the atmosphere and placing into the soil as organic carbon. And this is not just carbon dioxide, but nitrous oxides and methane, all expressed as equivalents of carbon dioxide. These concepts that are, imagine explaining this to a farmer is going, what are you talking about? And, are you gonna pay me for this? How are we gonna actually connect the dots? So educating the buyers, educating the growers, pulling that together, and then actually issuing credits. And just this June, we issued our first almost 20,000 tons of carbon removed from the atmosphere as part of that initial cohort of farmers. That was a few 100,000 acres. We then signed up more. We're now close to 6 million acres going into our third year of producing carbon credits. So we're one of the companies that has done the first carbon program in agriculture using soil as the sequestration. So a voluntary carbon program with a nature-based solution, of course. And we found the buyers and connected everything together. So we've shown that the technology's ready. The academic community's worked for over 30 years on the models and the soil measurement and the other elements that are essential to assure all parties involved and the public that this is real, measurable, repeatable. And we've really worked hard to make sure that's demonstrated and growth. We started, of course, in the US, was our first project. We have a partnership in India where we're working in the Punjab area in the north on a rice-wheat rotation. We're starting work in South America between Argentina and Brazil. And then we have a program as part of the Vera VM42 methodology in the North Maritime region in Europe. So that's France, Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. So that's one of the first programs that's ever crossed in carbon credit worlds, crossed international boundaries and is looking more holistically. And that's really because of the nature of these programs. They require rigor, they require scale. And that's one of the great opportunities that the EU has working together, thinking about the scale of how you reduce the risk and move some of that financing forward. But in the end, these programs really come down to financing vehicles that incent behavior change and work with growers then to make all of that possible. And the great opportunity in agriculture, the other piece to really focus in on is the timeliness. The fact that this technology is all there. The growers are there, the land is there, the practices that we're asking them to change, it's cover cropping and no-till and changes to nitrogen application behavior, all of that's possible. So that can be implemented now in the short term when our environment and our atmosphere needs it desperately. And agriculture can be the heroes as we move forward in new technologies. We'll need all technologies. I think one of the comments earlier, we can get to 85, 90%. The thing I like to say is we need 5 Earths worth of agriculture to really fix the challenge. So as we think about, we have one Earth, and let's use that to its greatest advantage to reduce what we can, and hopefully make the price of carbon too then, and the price of offsets high enough that it incents actual behavior change in the rest of industry, not just as an escape mechanism from getting out of costs. That's a great opportunity for ag.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm actually going to firstly maybe go back to Shari, if you could maybe pass the microphone. You mentioned in your introductory remarks, from the farmer's perspective, there were a number of obstacles that you wanted to talk about, obstacles for farmers to innovate and to digitalize. Perhaps we could kick off a little bit of the discussion from the farmer's perspective. What do you see as being the main obstacles there for farmers?
Sure, and I'm generally an optimist, and so I feel like at this point I'm going to turn to be either the pessimist or the realist on this panel,
Okay.
but it is the reality. So as I shared, just even on our farm perspective, even though we are innovators, even though we are advancing many of the things we're talking about here today, the core challenges really are labor shortages, capacity in general. We've got 3 family members farming the 4,000 acres, juggling all the demands that operation takes. And so, sometimes you have to deprioritize as things pop up. There's also the know-how challenge. So as I said, we've plateaued with our cover crops. We've been doubling them every year because they have proven to be a good solution for us. And yet we're having challenges on some of the new fields. We're not getting consistent stands across the fields with our cover crops, and yet we lack partners who can really help us solve for that. There's been a broad decline in extension services across the US, so it takes time then to find those people who can help us with that. I don't see a short-term solution on the labor side of things. In our county, for example, the population is declining. You can't have a baby in our county, which seems to shock people when you can have a baby, but you don't have the services to support it in terms of the hospital support. So these are long-term challenges that we in the U.S. do need to solve in terms of getting the labor that is needed to really advance both the regenerative ag and the digital ag.
And I'd like to come back, Jeremy, I have a question for you here. Another obstacle that I hear a lot when I talk to farmers, again, it's the same theme that comes up again and again. It's this idea of data sovereignty, data ownership, privacy, producers' rights. They seem to raise this with me every time I speak about digitalization of farming. I wondered if perhaps you would be in a good position to comment on this a bit and talk about how you safeguard farmers' data, because this can also be a sensitive point in the discussion.
Yeah, and that one's not limited just to the agriculture sector, right? Customers across the board have some of those same concerns, and many of them are completely understandable. The good news, I think, is that many of the reservations about sharing data or providing data, technology's gone a long way towards addressing some of that. So if it was concerns about the loss of IP or the loss of trade secrets or the misuse of data, technology solutions have evolved to the point where you can mitigate some of that through things that are now possible that weren't possible 10 years ago. On the other hand, there's the legal side of that, and sometimes those goalposts do move, and that is hard to keep up with from our side. But that is part of our value offering. Farmers are not going to use solutions they don't understand or solutions that they don't trust. So that falls back on us to make sure we're delivering that in a way that's understandable and verifiable, accountable. Again, sometimes it's a little challenging because the goalposts do move there on the commission side, but we have technological ways of addressing that, legal ways of addressing that. We continue to make commitments in that space and commitments that we're proud of. But it is true that farmers won't use these technologies if they don't understand them, and certainly if they have any reservations about what might be misused with their data. And that's part of a conversation that we have to have. Those are part of demonstrations that we have to do, use cases that we build out to see the value offering. So it's a valid concern, and it's one that I think we're working towards all the time to make part of the offering. At the end of the day, what I always try to remind people in this space is, we're only going to be successful if those customers are successful. So these partnerships have to be successful for us to be successful. And if we can't make the arguments and convince farmers about those reservations, then we won't be successful.
Mm-hmm. And maybe sticking with the theme of different farmers' concerns, Kirsten, I'm going to come to you if you could maybe pass the microphone. Thank you. Something we've brought up a lot already today in the discussions is around the proposal last week, the Commission's proposal on carbon certification. And it got quite mixed reviews, this proposal. The farmers, although obviously farmers have huge potential for carbon removal and this carbon certification and benefiting from this, there were some negative reactions in the farming community about various components, the additionality element of this, and what happens with the certificates, whether they'll be publicly or privately traded, etc. Perhaps you could have a little comment on the proposal and the reactions to this.
Yeah, I mean, this is in the nature of things. When you're pioneering, that this is not necessarily always easy. Yeah? So, and it's not necessarily always easy to start getting that on the ground and start getting that going, but you have to start somewhere. And this is a proposal which provides solutions and the way to go forward, and then we have to adapt also as we go along with these areas. This is one of the important areas where we know we can make progress, and the figures in the US and in the EU with regards to emissions are roughly the same. So there's quite a job that we have to do. There is the challenges that are ahead, and we have to involve everybody as we go along. So now coming from my area as well, so then you have to look, okay, where can you find solutions and where can you support? And there I would maybe also get a little bit to what Sherry was saying. So the first is the knowledge gap. So where we can certainly mitigate, where we can help, because there are solutions which are available. So we have to make sure that they actually get there. So there's one key thing that was mentioned. So in the US, extension service you mentioned are going back. This is not necessarily the case in the EU. But there's also an issue of when you have the extension service, be it private or public, being sufficiently trained and aware of the things that you actually need to get to the ground. That's something that also in the area of carbon credits, carbon farming. So where is the experience and where is somebody who, and a trusted advisor that can help the farmer actually implement these things out there? And there's not necessarily reading all the scientific journals all day long. So that's not part of your job description normally. There's other things you have to do. So and these are issues that we have to address along with the investment gap. And then there's the financing. And I think there we have quite a good system available where we can reward those practices as well. And I think that's what we have to work on. And that was also mentioned quite prominently, I think, by the Undersecretary. So maybe as a first reaction.
Okay, thank you. And Chris, I'll come to you now. I think you have your own, or however you want to do it. You spoke in your introductory remarks about economic incentives for farmers. Perhaps you could also expand a little bit more on how best you think we can accompany farmers to transition to regenerative agriculture and what is needed to ensure this transition is economically viable from your experience with these programs you were mentioning.
Yeah, we started out with looking at analogs in the market of credits that were already trading. And many forest credits and others were in this $5 to $10 range. So we tried 20. It's a more valuable credit. We sold out immediately, of what we had. So we raised the price to 27 and we sold out. And we raised the price to 40 and we sold out. And now we raised the price to 49 and we sold out. So there's a high demand. We had a whole team originally focused on just going out and educating buyers and starting to focus in on how to make sure that there was a demand. We wanted to make sure we signed up an initial group of buyers to show farmers that they're real companies and they're ready to buy. We think, though, when we think about, and with the experience now where we operate in 32 states across the U.S., in those different regions, we've seen areas where farmers are profitable on the production of credits, and other areas where at that pricing, they're not. So the way the program works, 75% of that final sale price of the carbon credit goes directly to the farmer, and 25% goes to the management and the partners, the agronomic consultants, the others that are doing the education and helping that grower on the planning of the transition and doing these new practices. So when you look at that, 75% of $40 or $50, and you think about an effect size of about half a ton produced per acre with some of these early practices, you're on that $15 per acre. Well, a cover crop could be $15, $20, even $30 per acre. So I think what we need to see generally is a price support. And one of the things that we've, of course, lobbied in the US and would love to see in other areas too is a minimum price set or minimum price support. There's a real opportunity in this for carbon to settle in, and there are projections. You name it. Publication has put out estimates in the $130 to $170 range. That would provide dollars back to a farmer that's greater than the cost of production, which I believe strongly in. I don't think a grower should lose money to fix the carbon footprint of a business that's not their own, right? So they should be paid well for what they're doing. And it's not out of the range of reasonable levels. We're not talking about thousands of dollars per ton. We're talking about just in that $100 to $150 range. So I think as we see prices go up into that range, we'll see the middle majority of farmers then start to participate in a big way. We also see, and there were some recent documents out just in September of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and the Science-Based Targets Initiative, looking at Scope 3 and thinking about the Scope 3 impacts of consumer packaged good companies that have ingredients that are sourced from agriculture. We work with those as well. So if a farmer is producing through a contract there, or they want to produce a carbon credit, or they're in a rotation where one of their crops is suitable for a Scope 3 program and one is suitable for a carbon program, we're able to accommodate that in the program. And I think what we'll start to see is that the price of what a CPG is willing to do to remove carbon from its Scope 3 emissions and what the price of a carbon credit will be, they'll ratchet each other up, then they'll ratchet each other down into some level, and hopefully that settles into that middle $100 to $200 range is where we're hoping.
Some interesting lessons to draw from there. Julia, let me come to you now. You raised some concerns in your introductory remarks about, maybe sometimes technological advancements can be used to maybe prop up unsustainable systems rather than moving towards regenerative systems. What would you like to see that could ensure that these are being used in a positive way, these tools?
So, for example, there are already some business model in some of the processors. So I'm Italian, and of course I'm very fond of pasta.
Of course.
And we know that Barilla has a quite good business model, and they have been partnering with WWF Italy to arrive to that. And for example, they collaborated with WWF Italy to have a list of practices that they would like to see to be implemented at the production level. And Barilla is financially rewarding and as a premium to see those practices being implemented on the ground. And it's something that it has been growing in I think it is a little, probably 5 years. So this can be a good examples. And speaking about, for example, carbon farming and certification of carbon removal. So I'm not personally following the details of the proposal that now has been put forward by the EU, but I know that for us it's two are the main points that should be quite clear. That's one, that we need carbon removal, but it did not come to an expense of emission reductions. So they both need to come together. So because according to the IPCC, we need both of them. So emission reduction and carbon removal. And the other things is that the removal should be permanent. So those are the two main elements that we are keeping saying that it's quite important to have in mind when speaking about carbon removal and carbon certification.
Excellent, thank you very much. Well, I'm quite conscious that the clock is ticking. We could perhaps take 1 or 2 questions from the audience if there is one, if anybody has a question. There's a couple of questions. The hand went up there at the back first.
Thank you. My name is Constance Coleman. I'm president and CEO of the American Feed Industry Association. And my questions go a bit to Jeremy and Chris. As we talk about carbon credits I think that's a very important outlet for farmers. But you also mentioned Scope 3 and CPG companies, and that's an area that we are spending a great deal of time working on. But we've recognized that each segment of the supply chain has to benefit and get something from that overall price premium in order for it to work across the supply chain. So I guess my question's a little bit twofold. One, Jeremy, do you believe that we're getting to that point where transparency up and down the supply chain is something that farmers and others will feel secure with to be able to achieve those kinds of tracking, to be able to have valid claims by the CPG company? And Chris, I'm a little bit curious what your research is finding on being able to actually track Scope 3 emission reductions, because carbon credits, once that's out of the system, you can't also claim it on a CPG product. So I'm very curious, because we're so market-driven on sustainability in the US.
Okay, thank you for your question. Jeremy, perhaps you want to go to you first?
Sure. And listen, when it comes to Scope 3 emissions, I mean, even our own sustainability report that we produce every year, I mean, you see the challenges we have on the Scope 3 side more than the progress we've made on the Scope 1 and 2 side. So well aware of the challenge. On the transparency point, I could answer it a little bit differently. One, I think it's one of the things we've been calling for is the need for consistency there and the common metrics. And it's not that straightforward, especially when you get to sectoral data. However, some of that is going to be increasingly required. So the transparency, it's almost whether you're comfortable with it or not, it's going to happen, especially when you think of some of the new EU reporting requirements and the like. So certainly can be sensitive to that caution around the transparency, because we feel that even as a first-party provider, different ways of delivering different things. We're very proud of the innovations we've taken in a data center context, if you think about it. And sometimes metrics may not adequately reflect the full picture of emissions reductions or sustainability. So those are conversations that need to keep happening, especially at those standards development level. But you do need common standards in that space. And I think some of the transparency, the more cynical answer, unfortunately, is that it's going to be increasingly required. So I would then bounce back to those standards discussions that need to happen to really make sure it's adequately granular. And I think some of that's reflected in legislation here, at least. But it's a sensitivity that we share as well. And Scope 3 is certainly where we know the big challenges.
Thank you. And Chris, perhaps a quick word, because the clock is ticking.
Yeah, no, thank you. When we think about the Scope 3 world, particularly around the feed industry, for example, if we take the example of soybean and think about the separation of soybean into soy oil, and then in the crushing process, and then the solids are going to feed, oil's going to sustainable aviation fuel and renewable diesels. That industry is more than willing to take the full environmental goodness of that message and not really leave it to the food. We do have to think about how that's portioned. The science is there to look at the ingredients, the ingredient components, the pieces, and this is the advantage of the data systems put into place now. Very sophisticated data collection and interaction with farmers linked to all of the different systems that they have, the automated systems as part of tractors and machinery, and then also the records from their main suppliers when nitrogen applications happen, for example. All those systems are connected together in a way that reduces the grower entry burden, but also gives those that are creating the credits and the Scope 3 messages the confidence that those activities actually did occur.
Thank you very much. I think, unfortunately, I'm going to have to draw this panel to a close as we're a little bit late. But many thanks to all of you on our panel, and thank you to you in the audience. But don't go anywhere, because we have another panel starting now. So I will pass you back to Mark's capable hands to manage the next session. So thank you very much. Thank you.